So this is an OpenChain AI workgroup meeting, and this meeting is, as usual, designed to explain and actually facilitate the activities around AI, OpenChain, compliance, and a trusted supply chain. We're just at about 1 year and 19 months for this particular work group, and a lot has been done. Before the official start of this meeting, I'm just showing the antitrust policy notice. We do show this at the beginning of every Linux Foundation meeting. The full antitrust policy can be found on the Linux Foundation website. Now, the agenda today is really two parts, and it's very directly following up from a recent governing board meeting that we had in the OpenChain project. So we're going to go through the agenda items, the two items, in a little detail in a moment, but the big picture is that we are in a public comment period for the draft AI System Bill of Materials Compliance Guide that this work group has created. This started in early July. The 6-week public comment period will end on the 18th of August. So it's running through the summer holidays, which of course is a quiet period for us. So hopefully a few people will read their emails and take a moment to read through the guide and let us know if they have any concerns or additions they want to make. Now, this guide has so far had no concerns raised and no additional suggestions for improvement have been received. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. Assuming that the public comment period is completed in mid to late August, we'll probably be seeing release of the guide not too long afterwards. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But on this call, what I'd like to do is to give everyone a chance to talk about if this is a successful public comment period, if we go into publication, which we almost certainly will do, how should we message this guide to the supply chain? How should we judge if it is successful or not? And what's the time scale for further development? These are really important questions because this work group is the creator and controller of the guide. This work group is the collective party who is responsible for the guide, who is making decisions for the guide, and bringing those for final approval to the board. So it's very important that this work group defines what is success. What is it that would make us think this guide has done what was wanted after 19 months of work? It's very important that those metrics for success are realistic, but they're also somehow impactful on the supply chain. It's an important discussion. Before we do that, let's look at the public comment period. Let's take a brief look at item 1. So in the very beginning of summer, around May, the AI work group finished work on the guide. At that point, the AI work group was 17 months into existence. It started as a study group. It became a work group late last year and formally produced the guide. In May, it was decided the guide was done. All the feedback from the current participants was included. And what we needed to do now was to basically tell people we think this is what will be released. Because creating this guide is potentially impactful, this work group decided to put it before the governing board and seek their formal approval to go into a public comment period. That's very similar to what we do with standards. And this isn't a standard, this is a guide. But like I said, the potential impact of the guide is large, and therefore we went into a more formal process. The governing board met in the United States at Open Source Summit North America. They had a board meeting on the 25th of June, and the board members unanimously approved the public comment period for this guide. So the board decided that the work group had done good work, important work, and they wanted to approve proceeding towards an official release of this guide. 6-week public comment period, and that was launched on the 7th of July. So as I mentioned, assuming no issues arise, this draft that we currently have will be regarded as final, and then we'll move into a release phase in coordination with the governing board. All of this suggests that the AI compliance guide will likely be out in September 2025. So it does suggest that the guide, as it stands, as was locked down and moved into a preparation for public comment in May, will go into a final release in September. I'm just going to drop a link into Zoom in case people want to see the public announcement about the public comment period. And that links to the guide and all of that. And again, there have been no concerns raised and no additional suggestions for improvement received. So things are looking good, and they do suggest a September release is possible. Which brings us to item 2. Specifics. Now, I know it's the middle of summer. I know most people are on holiday, and it's very much appreciated that some of you had joined the call today. Ahead of finishing the public comment period, the question is, assuming that everything goes well, assuming we're releasing in September, how do you think we should proceed in the release? This work group owns the guide. This work group should determine how we roll it out. So how should we message this guide to the supply chain? How should we decide what are the metrics for its success? How do we decide that the supply chain has received it positively or negatively? And how do we determine the time scale for the next phase of development? In other words, guide version 1.1. I'm bringing this all up because we've gone through various positive experiences with other work groups. A great example is telco, where the SBOM quality guide went far beyond the telco industry. It was successfully messaged to the supply chain, and the fundamental metric for success was, would large telcos use it? And they do. Both Ericsson and Nokia have officially picked up the telco SBOM quality guide as the basis of managing SBOMs in their supply chain, even to the extent that Nokia created automation for double checking supplier SBOMs were valid against the telco guide. And they released that and contributed it to us. So on the AI side, this AI guide, how should we talk to the supply chain about it to A, encourage people to use it, and B, to engage them, not to make people concerned, but rather to provide them with the solution they need? How do we do that? And how do we determine it's successful? I just want to pause here and see if you have any feedback, any ideas. We're brainstorming at this stage.
Hey Shane, this is Nick. Can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Nick, it's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, it's been a while. I'm usually a little silent on these meetings, but so I it's these are great questions. It strikes me that prior guides, perhaps from other groups, probably have answered these questions and have come up with their own, like set of messages which worked or set of metrics that made sense for them. Perhaps it would be great to have a couple of references from other groups, how they did it and with the rationale behind those. Maybe that would be helpful to have a starting point that makes sense and that is, you know, that is acceptable to other OpenChain members.
Right. A great point, Nick. And perhaps just as an example, LFAI and Data had their model openness framework. And that material seems to have been messaged uh, quite effectively into the AI arena. Alan, your hand is up.
Thanks, Shane. One idea from my side would be to identify which are the big players
Mhm.
from the LF AI and data, and then try to simply hook them with the guide and spread the guide from the big to small by the power of example.
That's a very good point. And of course, it's relatively easy for us to engage with and collaborate with another LF project. We're all using the same systems. I have a question, and this sort of goes to Nick because I know Nick is involved in an AI startup. Nick, as you uh, dealt with all of the material coming out around AI recently, were there any guides or releases of information that particularly resonated with you? And I'm mentioning this because Alin has identified that we can look at the big players in LFAI, AI, and data and pretty easily approach them directly. Um, and it's a very valid approach. I think it's highly likely that's what the co-chairs of this work group will elect to do. But I also wanted to check with you, Nick, because I wanted to get the perspective of in startup land where everyone's so busy. Were there a few things that caught your eye, and if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I would say, from my perspective, these guys are, I would call them like outcome oriented. Like these are the things you need to do, or like the processes you need to put in place. And I
Yes,
don't know that they are capabilities oriented, meaning what are the things I need to be successful to accomplish these outcomes, if I'm
right.
making any sense. And so, from my perspective, I think, like as a startup, we hyper focused on the capabilities, I would say. Like, what would be the enabling capability, one of them, that would help accomplish some of the outcomes? And
Right.
so I think that's kind of how I think about this dichotomy, if you will, of these guides. The guides is it's kind of the quote unquote endpoint. And then I'm thinking, all right, what would be needed to accomplish that?
Hmm.
And so is that making any sense?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And so from that perspective, I think the suggestion to kind of ask the a range of players, in particular the big ones, because they probably have to deal with a range of issues, is I think is an interesting one. And I would add to that, the question about, all right, and what would be the capabilities that you need to accomplish the goals set by the guide? That would be a um, great point of information as well.
That's a really good point. Um, okay, and running with that just a little bit, one thing that comes up quite often is maturity modeling and so on. And if we're looking at capabilities, I suppose one question is is it going to be useful to identify or give an example of absolutely minimum capability and then potentially more complex capability? In other words, to introduce some examples of scale for business size and or maturity where people might start small and build from there. Would that potentially be useful?
So, assuming the question goes to me,
Yeah.
I think it could be. I think the issue with example chain, and you probably know this better than I do, is once you start giving, or pointing to certain ways of doing things, you may get a little bit of pushback if people are not doing it,
Yes.
in that particular way. And so I, yeah, I don't know. I would kind of, it may be highly context dependent, so I would test the water a little bit on some easy ones and kind of take things from there. Um, uh, yeah, and so I would welcome it, but I don't know that other members, which may have a point of view on how to do things, would be as comfortable with explicit examples of how to do things. So yeah, let's try things. Um, and obviously, like a very simple example would be, if you want, like, let's say you want to have people educated on the issue of, let's say we have a provision in the guide that says we want people to be educated on the issue of AI. Let's say it's a very very high level. One capability would be to have suitable training materials to educate them, and maybe we want to be more specific than that, and what kind of aspects the training materials should cover, and how often people should be trained, and so on and so forth. And so I think the finding the right balance between being specific enough so that it's actually helpful, and not creating a not being too specific that people become uncomfortable. I think
Right.
that's going to be a delicate balance, and maybe a challenge. So I think it's an interesting question. Maybe we just ask it open ended, see what people say,
Yeah,
and start slowly.
that's a great point, Nick. And you know, one rule of thumb we've always had is let's try to keep it as simple as possible and build out. Which sort of,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
and not be prescriptive, right? We want people to find their own solution. We just want to provide the structure to help them get there. Uh, there is a question which follows directly from this. We've had some great notes about messaging and approach. What is success? What what type of metric do you think we should use to decide this guide has been impactful on the market? And Yeah, Ellen, over to you.
I would say that the primary metric should be adoption. If we manage to present a guide to, let's say, 10 biggest players and two of them which have 40% of the market adopted, that's clear success because there will be others following.
Right.
I just made up the numbers, but yeah.
It's a reasonable metric, and you know, how I put it, our experience with OpenChain's original compliance work was little by little. We got more companies to build up. And nowadays, OpenChain's ISO standard for license compliance is so big, it feels like we were always there. But yeah, we started, I think it was Wind River announced conformance first, and then gradually other companies, and we built up over a period of a year or so momentum that then snowballed. But it sounds very reasonable to say adoption might be key. Um, Given that everyone's so busy and under such pressure economically as well as on time resources, should we avoid um, should we avoid aiming to put an arbitrary number and instead say what we want to do is have the momentum of, let's say, influencers or larger companies beginning to engage with and pick up this guide? Now, that's an open question. There's no right answer. I'm sort of referencing this thinking of the telco, where we know that Ericsson and Nokia are using it. We know that companies like KDDI were involved in making it, but we haven't, how do I put it, we haven't had a hard target for saying we need five telcos, or else this hasn't worked. So in that one, we said we want to see the momentum. We're seeing the big companies. We know that's going to trickle down to the small and medium enterprises. Do you think it should be something like that here? So we say we want some thought influencers on board, and we want that to run through the supply chain. And if we don't see that momentum happening, we look at course correction in, say, 6 months after release. Is that a reasonable approach, or is it just too vague?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Thanks, Nick. That's useful feedback. And I know that I'm literally brainstorming here because I want, how do I put it? Mm, we're not selling a product. We're selling an idea, and we don't want to shove it down people's throats, but we do want to make them enthusiastic. And if for some reason people hesitate on enthusiasm, we want to work out why. Which brings me to another question. We've seen a lot of engagement in North America and Europe around this guide. We've seen less engagement in Asia. Notably absent have been most of our friends and colleagues from China. But also Korea has been relatively quiet. Um, I think part of it is timing, because this call has been the main editing call, and this call is at a horrific time for Asia. That's why I'm very appreciating Ninjoji-san from Honda dialing in today. But part of it was probably also that, you know, people were looking and waiting to see what we've done. Now, I'll be in China next week. I'll be in Shanghai. I'll be talking about this guide. I'll be speaking to companies like ByteDance, Alibaba. And as you probably know, for instance, Quen comes from Alibaba. We've got DeepSeek coming from that. We've just had the announcement of Minimax 1 from another Chinese startup. There's a lot going on there. So we really need their voices as well. Perhaps one metric for success we should consider is geographic spread, making sure that we have leaders in, let's say, Japan and AI like Sony. We have leaders like Qualcomm in the US engaging deeply with this. Maybe we need to have some of the Chinese leaders or Korean leaders as well. I just saw LG AI Research doing a wonderful presentation in Seoul about how they had been essentially automating compliance with AI and getting very rapid, high fidelity analytics for license compliance. It sounds like we might need a few of them at the table. So potentially, as well as momentum in terms of huge companies, the super giants. Should we also look at geographic spread as a metric for success? Or is that less important to you than having the super giants? Or is it equal? It's just asking for opinions here. And there's no right answers, of course.
I think what you said, Shayna, regarding the people that needs to be on the table, is 100% valid. And probably these are the people from that particular network that really have to be involved. And I also like Alan's suggestion regarding communicating this to the big players, but it's not just, to me, it's just a matter of communication or sort of presenting to them, but they have to be involved in a way to make this possible, and also to take part into the building of the guide. So yeah.
Thank you, Nicola. A very good point. And Alin, your hand is up again. Over to you.
Yeah, sorry for jumping again. I'm thinking that the big players are actually all around the globe. Because if we think about the big companies that are involved in AI, they are localized in Asia, US.
No, you're right, Alin. You're right. And sometimes we look at market cap for company size, but we also, of course, have other metrics like installed user base. And looking at a company like Tencent, a couple of years ago, they had 1.6 billion clients. So relatively relatively big AI company right there. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Another idea that makes
I'm sorry, I missed the
sorry,
last part of your sentence. You muted, I
yeah,
think.
I'm sorry. So another idea maybe would be to talk with our friends from LFAI and data and
Yeah,
see what would be their feedback on measure points and what can be KPI since they have been in this sector for quite a while.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, we then sort of move on to something interesting, an intriguing question. So we have messaging, basically, let's see what the others have done to succeed, like LFAI and data. Metrics for success, the influencers, the super giants, but geography as well as just sheer visibility. LFAI and data is a good place to start. Yeah, timescale for the next phase of development. Now, this is sort of a leading question. Telco immediately started working on the next version of their guide as soon as they said version 1.1 is ready for release. Literally, as soon as they did that, we were going into publication of that, we were preparing the public messaging, they already started working on 1.1. Something similar actually happens in our spec team. I mean, on the board meeting that just happened, they just had a vote to say, updates to our ISO standards proposed, approved for sometime in 2026. Spec team heard that and said, great, let's start working on the next version of the standards now. And that means they're going to start working on things that will appear in market 2027, 2028. Anyway, so the question I really have to you, just the people on this call, is what's your appetite here? Once we finish the public comment period on the 18th of August, we're likely to have a publication in September. But does that mean we wait and see how the market reacts? Or already in the early September, do we sit down and say 1.0 is done? Let's talk about what could be done for 1.1. Let's start it right now, even prior to 1.0 being spread across the globe. Does that make sense to you, or does wait and see make sense to you? While people mull that over, I must admit it's a leading question because AI is moving so fast. We finished this in May. It's entirely possible new stuff will have happened by September. So it's sort of a leading question. But I do want to give space for people to say, no, I want to wait and see, or no, I want to track the market.
Yeah, just a thought. I think you'll see the engagement of the broader community, but I think one of the selling points of this kind of guide is that they are going to be maintained and kept up to par. And so, if we are to sell this thing, we have to say, hey, and it's being maintained, and the team is already working on the next version, as opposed to well, this one is current, and so we are waiting for adoption to start, like a new updating effort or something. So I think if we want to make this guide successful, you kind of have to work on the subsequent version and start bringing it up to date with the new developments. I think that's kind of a given, unfortunately. But we'll see what the broader community says.
Yeah. I mean, one, and this is again why I'm so grateful that people are taking a break from their holiday and so on. One purpose of this call is to record some stuff and to trigger the conversation. Yeah. And just a side note, on a personal level, I was sort of worried a tiny bit that when Telco went straight from we're done on 1.0, and immediately started 1.1, I was a tiny bit worried that people wouldn't adopt, that people would say, oh, this isn't baked. This isn't, I don't know. But the actual reaction was somewhat different. We had people just seeing it, tracking the market, and just picking up 1.0 and moving onward at their own pace, but appreciating the fact that the work group was actively moving to follow the market and try to make sure that as things like CRA landed, we were ready. Right. Some fantastic brainstorming, and the thing is now, is there any other business? Do you have any other thoughts that you want to share on this call? If there are none, well, that's great. It means we've done a great job. Uh, we're about to wrap up. and we're about to finish, which is quite early. It's 35 minutes in. But like I said, we're triggering the ability for people to converse about metrics for success, about messaging, about all of that before we finish the public comment period. And that's to put us ahead of the market situation. It's to put us ahead of need so that we have plenty of time to prepare. This guide that we've sort of modestly built is important. We have a model openness framework to determine how open stuff is. We have some great work in areas like OpenSSF around security, and that can apply to AI. We've got initiatives around the world, such as OSI's OpenAI definition, open source AI definition, I do apologize. And we have close to home things like the actual format being prepared by SPDX with their AI bill of materials. But no one else is making what we're making, which is a process guide to AI system compliance in the supply chain. If you're dealing with AI and you need system bill of materials, you need it for compliance purposes, what are the processes you need to see in your company and your suppliers' companies to reduce risk and increase trust? We're the only people doing that right now. And quietly and modestly, we're building something, well, have built something important, and we're bringing it to market. I personally just wanted to say thank you to all of you for doing this month after month with a crazy market where everything's flying around all the time. Making something like this is hard. It's a big accomplishment, and it's all yours. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. I appreciate you coming in today.
Hey, thanks, Shane. Thanks for organizing this.
Take care, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, have a good one.